Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and this time we are going to be going through an interview between Doug Bowser, the President of Nintendo of America, and Inverse, where a number of things are discussed, including Switch 2 to some extent here, rumors are addressed, and some of Nintendo's plans are outlined for the future. But before we go forward, let me point out that we are aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers, so if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell, and enjoy the ride as we talk about Nintendo every day. So we will be getting to the Switch 2 question, but this interview includes other details as well that I think are worth discussing that have implications overall for Nintendo. So for example, this first one right here. Producer Takashi Tezuka recently said Mario Bros. Wonder wasn't developed with a deadline in mind until much later in development. In an industry famous for crunch, how do you think the development team's approach affected the final product of Super Mario Bros. Wonder? Doug Bowser responds, "I'm always careful not to comment on the part of the developers, but in general what Mr. Tezuka noted was that very early on in the development cycle, he really did want to give the team the freedom to explore a variety of ideas. The result was a lot of unique and creative ideas that they could think about without the pressure of a deadline or the pressure of, how do I actually bring this to life? One thing with Nintendo development is we don't pressure our teams to deliver within a certain window. If they need more time, they'll take more time. And the reason for that is our players have an expectation of the quality that our games will bring. We want to make sure we respect that and deliver those wow moments." So I actually think this here is a very big deal. I think it touches on something I've been discussing as of late, and that's that the development ecosystem of Nintendo's different studios and how they all relate is the best it's ever been. So what I'm getting at here is that Nintendo, when the Switch generation began, unified their gaming divisions, handheld and home console. All their studios are focusing on a single platform, the Nintendo Switch. So by doing so, they're not spreading themselves too thin. But also Nintendo has made acquisitions over the years, and they've gotten better at producing more content. So when you factor those things together on top of these consistent remakes and remasters that usually don't require a full-scale development team, Nintendo has been able to deliver a lot of consistent content between brand new projects that have been worked on for years, and some quality games that have been revisited with some level of a re-release. And so what we're finding now is that Nintendo's actually been sitting on a lot of their big games, or in no rush to actually put them out. We've heard about Mario Bros. Wonder, how this has been in development for years, and they took their time and there was no real deadline for most of the project. But then also we heard about how Tears of the Kingdom could have released the year prior, but they spent that last year focusing on polishing the game. We also heard about Metroid Prime Remastered having been rated as the summer of 2021, but it didn't release until the beginning of 2023. More than a year and a half, that game was totally done. So the point is, Nintendo, with how successful the Switch has been, with their different studios, and these different strategies they have in place to maintain consistent content, they now have the luxury to not feel the pressure of a deadline. They can just have their studios focus on making quality games, and when they're ready, they're ready. And this bodes really well for future games. I mean, you just look at Mario Bros. Wonder. This game is being said to be the best 2D game in perhaps 3 decades. The best 2D Mario. And in large part, that's probably because they took their sweet time with this game. Nintendo's been taking their sweet time with other projects as well. We haven't seen a new Mario Kart since 2014. Nintendo's been sitting on Metroid Prime 4 for a very long time. 3D Mario, well, 3D Mario team made Mario Odyssey in 2017. What have they been working on since? There are big Nintendo projects that may very well be done or are in the polishing stages or are just being baked in the oven long enough to be made as great as possible. So just because we don't hear about them doesn't mean they don't exist and are not in a good state. If anything, what we've been hearing about lately, what Doug Bowser is referring to here in this interview, it suggests that not only are they in a good state, they are perhaps in a masterful state. So when they do release, they will also see incredible critical acclaim similar to Super Mario Bros. Wonder, similar to Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And given that Switch 2 is reportedly coming out sometime next year, I think this bodes well for some very exciting games to launch early on into the system's life. I won't be reading every single question here in this interview, so just to clarify, the link to this interview will be in the description below. Check it out, there are some interesting details here. But here's something else that I found to be worth discussing here. Leaks from the Federal Trade Commission vs. Microsoft trial revealed Microsoft had discussions about acquiring Nintendo. I'm not really asking you about why that would or wouldn't happen, but more broadly, what you think about the growing trend of acquisitions and what its effect on the industry has been and will continue to be going forward. We have a great relationship with Microsoft. We consider them to be partners in many, many ways, and you only have to look at Nintendo Switch to see that partnership. Obviously, Minecraft is on Nintendo Switch, and we brought Banjo-Kazooie to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, so we're looking forward to that partnership continuing. So this part to me is very interesting because when we heard about the leaks regarding Microsoft having intentions to acquire Nintendo, and that going public, there were some, myself included, that were kind of curious how some at Nintendo might feel about this. Now when you think about it, it's all a business. So it shouldn't shock Nintendo that Microsoft would be interested in acquiring Nintendo if possible. But it's not possible. And this fact doesn't impact their relationship, and as Doug Bowser says, what we've seen on Switch shows that they have a great relationship. There is a number of Microsoft published titles on Nintendo Switch, and we're not really seeing signs of that necessarily slowing down. With Microsoft now acquiring Activision, this means Call of Duty will be coming to Nintendo. They actually signed a 10-year deal. And we've seen Bethesda games on Switch, we've seen the Ori games on Switch. As I mentioned here, we've seen Minecraft, but also Banjo and Kazooie did come to Switch. So there are some very positive signs. We even have GoldenEye as well. Nintendo and Microsoft are working well together here, and I think this bodes well for them continually working together. And I will mention that once upon a time, just hasn't been addressed recently, I don't think that means it's not happening necessarily, but there was a rumor about some sort of Banjo-Kazooie project. What if there is a Banjo-Kazooie remake or a new Banjo-Kazooie game? Obviously that would come out on Xbox, but what if it also comes out on Nintendo? Considering the history, considering how well they work together, and they would probably make the money because a lot of Nintendo fans would probably buy Banjo-Kazooie, perhaps more so than Xbox fans would. That might happen down the road. And now finally to the question that a lot of people have been discussing over the last 12 to 14 hours or so. There have been reports that Nintendo showed off a successor to the Switch behind closed doors during Gamescom. As we have discussed, the Switch has had a long lifespan and a huge install base. How, when you consider the idea of a successor to the Switch, who are on the console transfer to the next platform while reassuring them that the content and investment in the Switch will somehow transfer to its successor? Doug responds, well, first, I can't comment, or I won't comment, I should say, on the rumors that are out there. But one thing we've done with the Switch to help with that communication and transition is the formation of the Nintendo account. In the past, every device we transitioned to had a whole new account system. Creating the Nintendo account will allow us to communicate with our players, and if and when we make a transition to a new platform, to help ease that process or transition. Our goal is to minimize the dip you typically see in the last year of one cycle and the beginning of another. I can't speak to the possible features of a new platform, but the Nintendo account is a strong basis for having that communication as we make the transition. So what's great about this interview, and also adds more relevance to the other question I talked about earlier, the other question being about the Microsoft Activision deal where there were leaks and Switch 2 was mentioned. Switch 2 is a very real thing, and Doug Bowser not denying it, that alone says something. Of course, he can't speak on the specific details of the rumors, but he's not denying it. So everything we've heard about Gamescom, as far as I'm concerned, this is about as close as possible to Nintendo confirming that they are true. But he also talks about how the Nintendo account there's a strong basis for having that communication as they make the transition. And what's interesting about this is that he also talks about how in the past they didn't really have this option. But technically, the same Nintendo account I had for my Wii U and my 3DS, I also have for my Switch. And the Nintendo account didn't mean that games I played on my 3DS or Wii U I could play on my Switch. Switch was not backwards compatible. But I'll argue that by him not alluding to that recent history where there was technically already in existence there, and referring to the future here, I think there is a hint that this time around, the transition is going to be even more connected and or integrated. So what I'm getting at here is that when we get our Switch 2, perhaps we can sign into our account, and maybe all of our eShop downloads will be available for re-download. Maybe our cloud saves, for when we bring over any game, be it through the eShop or perhaps even physically with a cartridge, those saves will still be there. Or maybe, similar to how when you get a new Switch, be it a Switch Lite or an OLED, and you had a prior Switch and you want to do a system transfer, you can also do a system transfer from any of the Switch 1 variants to the Switch 2. In an ideal world, all of those things will be the case. I can't guarantee that. We shall see what this actually amounts to, but I feel pretty good about saying that at least some of the things I just mentioned will happen for Switch 2. But another point I would like to address here is where he says, our goal is to minimize the dip you typically see in the last year of one cycle and the beginning of another. This is very interesting to me because I've been talking about a lot lately how when you look at the kinds of games that are coming out now for Switch, it's very clear, at least to me, that Nintendo's had more of a focus on remakes and remasters. And whenever I say this, and let me stress this, I am not trying to suggest that these games are of poor quality in any way, shape, or form. But what they are is not brand new titles. They are projects that don't require the full force of an entire internal Nintendo team. By doing these projects and more of them, it allows Nintendo to have their primary development teams working on brand new projects for the next generation. But it also allows Nintendo to put out consistent games even now, so there isn't really a dip. But what I do think it's strongly hinting at is that we are approaching the next generation. Just look at the last 3 years of Nintendo 3DS. There was a lot of remakes and remasters, more so than the prior years. If you look at this year, you look at what's been announced for next year, that is also the case. So this is the time. We are transitioning over. That to me is very clear. But it's exciting to hear from Doug Bowser, the president of Nintendo of America, himself saying that they are aiming to minimize that dip. As I've been suspecting, and I think that the way they've been handling their game releases is showcasing. But those are my thoughts on some elements to this interview. What do you make of the different details brought up in this inverse interview? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andre's Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.